With the release of the new edition of Horus Heresy, it's a great time to start an army. But choosing a faction can be difficult. So in this video, I'm going to paint and sometimes convert a Marine from each of the 18 legions to help myself choose. And maybe it'll help you choose one as well. If you're thinking it's just going to be 18 different colors of the same boring Marines, guess again. Each legion has its own character and feel, and I'm going to show you a ton of cool techniques to get different finishes, weathering, and to make your army your own. If you're not familiar with Horus Heresy, you might be wondering what exactly it is. Well, it's a prequel to Warhammer 40,000 set 10,000 years before, hence why it's sometimes called Warhammer 30,000 or 30k. It takes place during a giant civil war that spans the galaxy, in a future ruled by a powerful telepathic emperor. Led by Horus Lupercal, the Horus in Horus Heresy, half of the Emperor's space marines turn to the demonic forces of chaos and rebel against the Imperial. Horus is one of the Emperor's sons, or Primarchs, 20 genetically engineered superhumans the Emperor created to lead his legions of space marines. The Primarchs were all raised from infancy on different planets across the galaxy, emerging from drop pods into a wide variety of settings and societies, and their upbringings gave them each wildly different characters and personalities. Think 20 different variations of the Superman origin story. Upon reaching adulthood, each Primarch was given a legion of space marines, transhuman soldiers that the Emperor had genetically enhanced using genetic material from each respective Primarch. Thus, each space marine legion has some of the character of their Primarch. Some are noble, some are brutal, and some are in between. So let's begin. The most logical place to start is the first legion, the Dark Angels. The Dark Angels come from the forest world of Caliban, where their Primarch, Lionel Johnson, spent the first years of his life living feral in the Great Wilderness before being discovered and adopted by Sar Luther, a great knight from the feudal society of Caliban. I'm going to start by building one of these Space Marines using the box instructions to keep it simple for the first one. Space Marine armor has had many different evolutions over the years, called armor marks. Now the Marines in this box have Mark 6 Corvus pattern armor, and are affectionately called beakies by fans because of the beak on the helmet. This is actually a reincarnation of one of the earliest Space Marine designs from the Rogue Trader era of the 1980s. That's one of the really cool things about Horus Heresy. All the old stuff you may remember from your childhood is given a backstory and given life. It's a cool balance of fan service and world building. If you're familiar at all with Warhammer 40,000, you might remember that the Dark Angels have an iconic green armor. But as the Horus Heresy takes place 10,000 years prior, many of the legions had a different color scheme back then. The Dark Angels in Horus Heresy have black armor, so I started by priming the Marine black. With the dark gray, I add a lighter value from above with my airbrush to simulate the lighting environment. By the way, if you're worried that this whole video is going to be just airbrushing, have no fear, there are tons of brush-only techniques as well, and there will be methods for painting and weathering Marines with only a brush as well. Anyways, I paint the Marine's gun with Mephiston red as an accent color. I also paint one of his elbow pads and the coils on his power pack as well. Having 3 nicely spaced out splashes of the primary accent color adds balance that helps your eye move around the model. Good color composition will go a really long way to making your army look nice. I pick out some accents with dark steel color, hitting the gun, crossbelt buckle, studs on the shoulder pad, and vents on the backpack. Next, I paint a nice white stripe on one leg and one shoulder pad. We'll come back to these in a moment. I add some chunky gray highlights and apply Caribird Crimson wash to the red to add depth and saturation. Back to the white stripes. One thing the 30k Dark Angels are known for is checker patterns, as you can see in images like this one. To make checkers, I start by carefully drawing light guidelines with a mechanical pencil. I don't have the steadiest hands in the world, and I don't want to spend forever on one Marine, but this method helps. Using a red Micron pen, I sketch in the red checkers. This is much faster and I find much easier than using a brush. I also paint the eye lenses red, highlighting to a bright red towards the front of the lens, then adding a pure white dot at the back to look like a nice shine. I also add some Nuln Oil to the metallics for a bit of contrast. I lock that in with a coat of gloss varnish to protect it for the next step. Let's do a quick forest base to simulate the Dark Angels' homeworld of Caliban. I'll use the contents of a tea bag, some brown paint, and some glue, and mix it into a paste. This will be the leaf mold that will form the bottom layer of the base. I pushed a little stick into this mix while it was drying, then applied some darker brown paint because I wasn't happy with the color. Next, I'm going to apply some clump foliage from Woodland Scenics to imply the little shoots of undergrowth that you see on the forest floor. Using a bit of green wash, I darken these up here and there to add some variation to the brown as well. With that dry, I applied Dirty Down Moss, a really interesting paint with some really special properties. As it dries, a nice vibrant moss effect emerges. And just like that, our first marine is done. We have 19 more legions to get through, so let's keep going. The third legion is the Emperor's Children. Led by Fulgrim, the Phoenician, the Emperor's Children were the embodiment of the ideal Space Marines and exemplified Imperial perfection. Sometimes I wonder if their perfect Primarch with his blonde hair was in some way inspired by a certain WWF wrestler.
Mr. Perfect. And yes, I am perfect in every way.
Anyways, I thought this would be a good model to show that the Space Marines often resemble their Primarchs. So I used a spare head that I had from an old Blood Angels kit because it has this sort of arrogant sneer and looks a bit like Kurt Hennig. It also has this little circlet that I thought embodied the excess and splendor of the Emperor's Children. To paint this model, I wanted to get a really bright and shiny candy purple finish on the armor. To achieve this, I started by airbrushing silver over a black primer, then applied purple ink in thin transparent layers, slowly building up the color. The result is really bright and ostentatious, and perfect for the Emperor's Children. I locked in this layer with gloss varnish, then applied some Tamiya panel liner to the cracks. I accidentally dropped the model and his gun fell off, but this actually made it easier to paint. I painted the face and hair with Wraithbone white, and picked out the gun and cross belt with black and the metallic bits with silver. I then painted the face with some contrast paint. I picked out the circlet with gold, and at this moment, I noticed a little blood drop shaped gem since it's from a Blood Angels kit. Oops, let's just paint that as a lock of hair and not mention it. For final details, I add some highlights to the black parts, carefully pick out the eyes, and now it's time to give him a suitably extravagant base. So I'm going to make it look like he's standing on a pink marble floor. I start by sanding the base smooth, then paint the base with a nice pink. I then stretch an old dryer sheet over the base. I spray off-white through the gaps in the sheet, which when revealed, leaves a nice marbling pattern. I go back in with some pink paint to paint some fine veins to really sell the marble look. I then apply a coat of gloss varnish. With a short length of pin, I reattach the marine, clean up the base rim with some black paint, and call it done. This Emperor's Children Legionnaire is ready for the table. I think it suits the gauche tastes of the Emperor's Children, but also foreshadows the pink color scheme the Emperor's Children have after falling to the Chaos God Slaanesh. Nice. That's one loyalist and one heretic in the books. Moving right along. The fourth legion are the Iron Warriors. Led by the curmudgeonly Primarch Perturabo, the Iron Warriors are utterly impetuous, winning many bitter conflicts with sheer will and attrition. Some legions are associated more strongly with certain marks of armor than others in my mind, and I can't think of the Iron Warriors without picturing wearing iconic Mark III iron armor.
Ironic.
Luckily, I have a few bits of Mark III armor here, so I swap out the Mark VI head, shoulders, and backpack. Mixing and matching armor marks is fine, because just like in real war, in the Warhammer world, soldiers on campaign can have limited supplies, or have to make do with the kits that are available. Mixing armor personalizes your army and makes your soldiers look more like veterans. To paint this guy, I start by spraying him with metallic silver, then picking out one of his pauldrons and one of his greaves with a bold yellow. As that dries, I pick out some trim detail with metallic gold. Next, I block out the other pauldron, gun, and other details with black before adding a brighter yellow to the yellow from before, blending to make a nice gradient. With a Micron pen, I mark out some hazard stripes, then fill them in with a brush and some black paint. He looked too much like he was part of an 80s rock group at this point, so I blacked out the shoulder pad, leaving stripes on just one leg. To compensate, I added a panel of smaller stripes on his arm. I hit everything with a quick coat of gloss varnish to protect it for the next step. Time to get greasy. I mix up a thick mixture of black and brown oil paints with some mineral spirits, and then apply this oil wash liberally to the whole miniature. Once that is dried for a few hours, I come back in with some mineral spirits on a Q-tip, wiping away the wash from the raised surfaces, leaving dark grime in the crevices and leaving a nice streaky effect on areas like the hazard stripes. With that one quick step, the model looks grim, dark, and really cool. Oil paint doesn't totally dry for a really long time, so I lock everything in with some satin varnish to keep it from rubbing off on my hands in the future. To finish it off, I glued some chunky sand and rocks to the base, then painted them burnt sienna for a nice contrasting orange. The base is a great place to introduce a complementary color to make your models pop, so I like to go for high contrast. I apply some more oil wash, and since the Iron Warriors are masters of siege, I added a bunch of light grey pigment powder to indicate the dust of destroyed buildings and fortifications. Just like that, this Iron Warrior is ready to advance on Terra and lay siege to the Emperor's palace. It's really gratifying to get such nice results from a quick scheme, and it'd be a blast to paint an army like this. 4 legions down. Let's keep going. The 5th Legion Astartes are the White Scars, led by their Primarch Jagtai Khan. White Scars have sort of a Mongolian vibe, the Primarch hailing from the steppes of Chagoris, where horse archery is the prevalent form of warfare. Painting white armor is considered a big challenge by many people, so let me show you a clean, simple recipe. I start by priming the model grey, then with the airbrush I layer up lighter grey from above, and finally a very light grey from directly above the model. I'm not going to pure white here, we're going to leave that for a little bit later. If you don't have an airbrush but we're planning on painting a whole army this way, you could use rattle cans for this. I spray the whole model with gloss varnish to prepare for the next step, the secret weapon, Tamiya Grey Panel Liner. This panel liner is an enamel wash that's going to seep into all the cracks really effectively, giving nice contrast to the armor panels. I picked out some of the details in black, including the gun, the gaps between the armor, and the crossbelt. I also painted everything that's going to be painted silver in an upcoming step with black as well. Using red as an accent color, I picked out the strap and then did some freehand war paint-like markings on the helmet. I wasn't really happy with the mark that I'd made on the helmet. It looked too much like the beak of a seagull or something like that. It was a little bit too bird-like and cartoonish for me. So using a bit of off-white mixed with grey, I carefully painted over the shape, dividing it into 2, and I'm much happier with how that looks. I did another patch of red on the backpack for some balance, and then did the metallics, painting the chest piece, aquila, and studs in gold, and everything else in silver. I did a bit more panel liner around the studs, and then placed some bright highlights with pure white. This is why I didn't do pure white before, it leaves me something to highlight with. For the base, I mixed up an earth mix using grout modeling paste and paint, applying that to the base with a paintbrush. Then I touched up the rim with some black paint. With that dry, I applied some long tufts, cutting them into pieces to make a more natural look. One thing that I always see missing from bases with grass tufts on them is some trampled grass. So under the Marine's foot, I lay some blades flat with a drop of super glue. I'm really happy with how this turned out. And just like that, I have a Marine that looks like he's striding through the steppe grasslands of Chagoris. I have to say, that was fun and easy, and I think it looks awesome, and it's really tempting me to start a force of White Scars. It's still early in the list though, let's keep going. Wild, almost feral warriors, the Space Wolves hail from the icy death world of Fenris, a place so inhospitable that some have theorized that it was created in eons past with the express purpose of breeding the ultimate warrior people. Led by their formidable Primarch Leman Russ, the Space Wolves are often employed as the Emperor's shock troops for occasions when he needs a foe annihilated utterly. To create a Space Wolf, I did a simple head swap with an old Space Wolf head I had, a scowling, bearded face. Space Wolves often go into battle with furs or talismans on, so I dug up one of these wolf tails from an ancient kit and glued it onto his belt at the back. Space Wolves have a nice light bluish grey armor in 40k, but they always seem to be darker in 30k. To paint this guy, I start with a black primer, then apply a nice mid-tone grey through the airbrush. I add a highlight as well with a slightly lighter shade of grey from above. This gives some nice subtle gradients to those smooth panels. I block in the gun, armor gaps, and other details with black, then paint the face with a flesh tone. I carefully pick out the chest piece and aquila with gold, then paint the gun and the other mechanical bits with silver. Red is an accent color for Space Wolves in 30k, but rather than paint a piece of his kit red, I gave him red hair as a bit of contrast. This draws attention nicely to his face as well. The Primarch is a redhead too, so it works nicely. I add a few highlights to the armor with light gray, then apply some Agrax Earthshade wash to the gold, beard, skin, and fur bits. I add some subtle highlights to the skin and beard as well, before glazing some more vibrant red into the beard to enhance the contrast. I applied gloss varnish and used black Tamiya panel liner to add some nice definition to the armor. With that cleaned up, I applied a generous coat of matte varnish to get a nice frosty matte finish. I wanted to give him a realistic snow base to simulate a very cold wintry environment, rather than just patches of snow that would read to me as more of a spring thaw. To do this, I paint his base with light blue, then apply modeling paste straight over top. I use a paintbrush to tease the paste into the position I want, leaving some crumbles of snow, some bits caked into the cracks of his greaves, and some impressions where his foot would have disturbed the snow. The blue shines through very subtly, adding a lovely frigid feeling. And just like that, this member of the Vilka Fenrica is ready for war. I couldn't be happier with this snow base. I'll have to do more in the future. But for now, let's keep going. The 7th Legion are the Imperial Fists, the legion of Space Marines who are tasked with fortifying and defending Earth from the traitor legions during the Horus Heresy. Under the Primarch Rogel Dorn, the Imperial Fists are masters of fortification and defense. Imperial Fists are known for their brilliant yellow armor, and yellow can be challenging to paint, so let me show you a good recipe. I start with white primer, then over that use Averland Sunset through the airbrush, laying down a nice smooth layer of solid yellow. Then, from above, I use a brighter yellow, giving some highlights and volume. I seal these in with gloss varnish before the next step, brown Tamiya panel liner, which defines all the armor nicely. I clean up any overspill with a Q-tip dipped in enamel thinner, and the results are awesome. With that done, I start blocking in the other details with black, then pick out the metallic bits with silver. At this point, I add some edge highlights by mixing my brighter yellow with a bit of white, giving some nice sharp definition to the armor panels. I'm going to finish this lightning quick battle ready scheme by doing a nice rubble base. I wanted to capture a dusty battlefield where it seems like a lot of buildings have been reduced to rubble, like I imagine it would be like at the Siege of Terra once things started heating up. To do this, I glued some coarse sand to his base, and when that was dry, I painted it black. The black underpainting is going to add some nice contrast to that bright yellow armor. When a building collapses, a huge amount of dust is produced, so as a final touch, I take some light gray pigment and I dust it heavily over the base. And with that, this Imperial Fist is ready to defend the walls of Terra. I'm really happy with how this scheme turned out, but let's keep going. The 8th Legion are the Night Lords. Hailing from Nostromo, a planet of perpetual darkness, the Night Lords are known for the terror they inspire in their foes. Following the philosophy of their Primarch, Conrad Kurz, the Night Lords strike rapidly and without warning, and are utterly without mercy. To model a Son of Nostromo, I started with the plastic Mark VI kit, but went for the Lightning Claw option this time. Something about the claw weapon just feels very Night Lords. I opted for a headless helmet as well, because I wanted to show the ghostly pale skin of Nostromo's sons. I added a plasma pistol, and decided to add some older shoulder pads from a 40k Assault Marine kit. I opted for these older pauldrons because they have trim, and the silver trim on Night Lord's armor is part of their distinctive look in 30k, and I really wanted to capture that. As a final touch, I dug in my bits box for an old variant of a jump pack from the old Chaos Raptors kit. Sweet. That old chunk of metal makes it a bit top heavy, so I glue a washer to the bottom just to balance it out. To paint it, I prime the model black, then airbrush a nice even coat of Candor blue. For some directional highlights, I spray a Lightalk blue from above. Next, I come in with some oily steel from Vallejo. I was using a heat gun on low heat to dry the coats of paint between layers, but I turned it up too high here by mistake, and actually partially melted the pauldron here, bubbling the paint. Damn. Anyways, with all the silver picked out, I do black details and then paint the face with a flat layer of Wraithbone paint. To add some contrast and detail to the face, I glaze a very thin wash of purple into the recesses and cracks. This gives some pale lividity and character to the face. I also hit all the armor panels and silver bits with a wash of Nuln Oil. This dulls it down to the gritty midnight clad I picture from the Night Lords. I then apply some Lightalk blue to the edges, carefully highlighting to define the details. I seal this in with a coat of gloss varnish, before applying a Night Lord's transfer I have from a 40k kit. To balance the red of the logo, I go for an orangey red color on the plasma. I'm not particularly pleased with that plasma effect, so let's just move on. For a final touch, I add lightning by carefully thinning some lilac blue with medium and drawing progressively thinner squiggly lines, mixing in white. On the lightest pass, I only hit a few corners and segments. The result is a nice natural looking glowing lightning. For the base, I violated my normal policy of going for a high contrast by going for a mix of dark grey coarse sand, modeling paste, and grout. This gives a nice dark wasteland look that captures the perpetual darkness of Nostromo very nicely. This guy looks badass. Night Lords are so cool. I've got a 40k Night Lords army, but maybe I'll double down and do 30k as well. We'll see. Moving on. If you've been paying close attention, you might have noticed that I skipped the 2nd Legion, and there's a good reason for that. The 2nd Legion is redacted. Okay, what does that mean? Well, all records of the 2nd Legion and the 2nd Primarch have been scrubbed from Imperial records. We literally know nothing about them, not even their name. Everything we as the fans know about the Warhammer world is supposedly related to us by scribes, remembrancers, and Imperial propagandists. We are getting a biased view of everything, so everything should be taken with a grain of salt. This was especially clear in the early codexes and rulebooks in Warhammer 40,000, where little snippets of lore were presented as primary sources, transmissions, and things like that. Suffice to say, the 2nd Primarch has been wiped from Imperial records for whatever reasons. Considering half of the Primarchs literally allied with demons to try to destroy the Imperium, and we have extensive records of them, it's hard to imagine what one has to do to be scrubbed from the records. Anyways, scrubbed they were. Some people speculate that the missing Primarch might have been Sigmar, the godlike figure who appeared in the Warhammer fantasy world heralded by a twin-tailed comet, which is maybe a drop pod. Others speculate that a missing Primarch allows players to create their own legion and encourages creativity. And an even smaller group of people speculate that the 2nd Primarch might have been today's sponsor, the Magnet Baron. Okay, not actually, but I'm happy to be working with the Magnet Baron because magnetization is a really useful tool for a hobbyist. Sometimes when you're getting magnets for your models, it's difficult to know if you're getting the right strength or the right size of magnets, and the Magnet Baron is wonderful because Constantine, the owner of the Magnet Baron, is a wargamer, so he understands these problems intimately, he understands the use cases for magnets, and his website is tailored to making sure you can find exactly what you need for your wargaming needs. So if you haven't magnetized your models yet, head to themagnetbaron.com, tell him I sent you, and get all the magnets you need. Now let's get back to painting these Space Marines. From the desert planet of Baal, the Blood Angels are the 9th Legion Astartes. Sons of Sanguinius, the angelic Primarch, the Blood Angels are known for their iconic blood red armor. I have a 40k Blood Angels army, so I had a lot of spare bits to choose from, and I went with a special shoulder pauldron and a beaky helm with a gem detail. Now I'm not gonna lie, I'm very unlikely to start a 30k army that matches my 40k Blood Angels, so I'm gonna use this as a chance to show how to speed paint Marines using only a brush. I start by applying Mephiston Red over the grey primer, before picking out black and silver details. To add some contrast, I washed the armor with Carroburg Crimson, adding depth and saturation. With that dry, I add some chunky highlights with the bright red, before dry brushing the whole thing with the same bright red to pick out some of those smaller edges that I don't want to take the time to highlight individually. I add a few bright highlights with orange to get some nice crisp edges. I pick out the gemstone detail with some gold to start with. Adding extra details can be a double-edged sword as it'll slow down your paint job, but the final result can look great. As a final detail, I paint the eye lenses and the gem a nice brilliant blue. To make a base that simulates the desert world of Baal, I mix up some burnt sienna paint, sand, and grout all together, then apply that liberally to the base. When that's dry, add a little bit of pigment powder for a dusty effect. And just like that, this Blood Angel is ready for the battlefield. It looks pretty awesome, it didn't take that long, and we didn't even need to use the airbrush. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's move on. The 10th Legion are the Iron Hands, and of all the Emperor's sons, no legion has a closer relationship with the cult Mechanicus. The Iron Hands make extensive use of bionics, replacing what they view as their weak and fallible mortal flesh with whirring mechanical limbs. To make an Iron Hand, I made use of the backpack that comes with a mechanical looking servo skull and dug into my bits box for an old Dark Angel head that has a special Crusader helm with some of the mechanical bits on it. Unfortunately, the faceplate has a Dark Angel logo on it, so I covered this up by carefully cutting a piece of the respirator from one of the helmetless Mark VI heads, making a special custom head. To paint this guy, I spray black primer on, then dry brush with dark gray to pick out some of the edge details. I use a lighter gray to get some further definition on the edges. Next, I paint the metal bits with oily steel. The Primarch, named Ferrus Manus, had a mysterious form of living metal grafted to his hands after defeating a mythical monster. So in honor of this, many Iron Hands replaced their left hand with a mechanical hand, but my guy has both hands made of metal. I painted the skull and his bolt gun with an off-white, and picked out the lens details in a cold yellow. Using a small piece of sponge, I dabbed some ragged marks on the edges of the armor with metallic silver. This was to give the impression of battle damage and to break up all those flat black panels. I wanted to capture a heavily industrial feel to suit the Iron Hands, so I decided to use a Sector Mechanicus base. I sprayed the base silver, then applied several washes, finally highlighting the edges with silver to redefine the shapes. As a final touch, I applied some burnt sienna pigment to get a rusty, dusty feeling of an inhospitable forge world and to evoke the connection with the cult of Mars. Just like that, this guy's ready for the table. For a quick scheme, I think it looks awesome. Okay guys, we're 10 legions down and 10 to go. This video is getting a bit long, so I'm going to split it into 2 parts and tackle the next 10 legions in the next episode. They're already painted and a big chunk of the editing is done, so it should be coming down the pipeline shortly. Make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss it. Hope you enjoyed this video guys, and we'll see you next time on Eric's Hobby Workshop.